Marie Antoinette was long rumored to have been in love with a Swedish nobleman, who might have fathered at least one of her children, when modern technology was used to examine some of the correspondence between the Queen and the aristocrat. It supported what until then had been mere gossip. Below are 20 things about that and other historic love affairs, marriages, and romantic entanglements. The young Marie Antoinette and the handsome Swede. Count Hans Axel von Fersen went on a grand tour of Europe in his teens, and in 1774 he arrived in France. The Count, who was 2 months older than Marie Antoinette, met the future queen at a ball when they were both 19 years old, and she was the Dauphine or French crown princess. They both liked what they saw. For the Dauphine, the contrast between the dashing young man and her schlub of a husband, the future Louis XVI, must have been stark. A few years later in 1778, von Fersen was back in France, and Marie Antoinette, who by then was queen, had not forgotten the handsome Swede. She often inquired about von Fersen, and chided him when he missed some of her parties, informal affairs held in her private chateau on the grounds of Versailles, the Petit Trianon. In his diary entry for November 19, 1778, the Count wrote, "The Queen treats me with great kindness. I often pay her my court at her card games, and each time she makes to me little speeches that are full of goodwill. As someone had told her of my Swedish uniform, she expressed a wish to see me in it. I am to go Thursday thus dressed, not to court but to the Queen's apartments. She is the most amiable princess that I know." The love of Marie Antoinette's life. Count Axel von Fersen kept a lot of his correspondence with Marie Antoinette. It contained no proof of a love affair, but we now know that is because he had censored and altered a lot of it before he died. Scientists recently subjected some of the letters exchanged between the Count and Queen to X-ray fluorescence, which revealed what had been originally written. Words such as adore, madly, and beloved jumped out of the pages to indicate that the relationship between the two was not platonic. Even in worldly France and the decadent world of the 18th century French court, no woman would lightly use a word like beloved to a man who was not her husband. Stuff like that triggered duels, and in the case of a queen, could amount to treason and result in a trial for adultery or even execution. Indeed, French history had examples in which extramarital affairs with royal women ended in the torture and execution of their lovers, and the imprisonment of the royal ladies. For Marie Antoinette to refer to von Fersen as her beloved on paper, in her own handwriting, was not the equivalent of a modern innocent dear ex. Marie Antoinette could hardly mask her feelings for von Fersen. The Queen of France's attraction to von Fersen did not go unnoticed. Sweden's envoy to the court of King Louis XVI noted in 1779 that Marie Antoinette could hardly hide her love for the Swedish Count in public, and he feared that a scandal might erupt at any moment. He was relieved when his fellow Swede left for the American colonies in 1780, where he served as an aide-de-camp to the Comte de Rochambeau, commander of the French army that fought on the Patriot side. Von Fersen was in at the kill when the Allied French and American armies besieged and forced the surrender of a British army at Yorktown in 1781. He returned to France in 1783 and resumed his love affair with Marie Antoinette. Secret letters were exchanged, and his diary contains numerous entries about a woman named Elle, his code name for the Queen, whom he madly loved but could not wed because she was already married. In the meantime, it was an open secret that whenever von Fersen was in Paris, he spent days on end at Marie Antoinette's private chateau, the Petit Trianon. When he left for Sweden a year later, he got the Queen a dog which she cherished and named Odin. The lackluster love life of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. It seems that King Louis XVI knew of his wife's love for Axel von Fersen, but did nothing about it. For a French monarch, this Louis was not much of a womanizer or any type of womanizer at all. French kings had long been known for their insatiable lust, but not Louis XVI. He married Marie Antoinette in 1770 when he was 15 and she was 14, but showed little interest in her, and the marriage was not consummated until 7 years later in 1777. In a letter to his brother, Holy Roman Emperor Joseph II wrote that Louis had confided to him what he did with his queen. He introduces the member, stays there without moving for about 2 minutes, then pulls out without having ejaculated and bids goodnight. In addition to inexperience and shyness, Louis might have suffered from phimosis, a foreskin condition that causes pain when the penis is erect. Reportedly, it was only after he underwent surgery that he was finally able to consummate his marriage. Louis and his queen seldom spent much time together, and he often ate and drank so much that he became nearly senseless and had to be carried to bed. With such a husband, it is no surprise that Marie Antoinette looked for love outside the marriage, and sought somebody who had a clue what to do in bed. A cuckolded king who was cool with it. Whatever the details of the French royal couple's love life, what is known is that before von Fersen showed up, Marie Antoinette had not conceived her first child until 7 years after she had been married to Louis. There was then a 3-year gap, which coincided perfectly with von Fersen's absence in America before she got pregnant again. Within a month of the Count's return to France in 1783, Marie Antoinette went from 2 pregnancies in 10 years to 3 pregnancies in 3 years. The first pregnancy ended in a miscarriage, the second one produced a son, and the third a daughter, who did not live long, the son who survived the future Louis XVII, who died in captivity during the French Revolution, bore a strong resemblance not to Louis XVI, but to von Fersen. We now know that the French king was autistic, and although quite intelligent, had trouble looking people in the eye, was obsessive-compulsive and needed to do things in accordance with a rigid schedule, and cried easily. He also did not seem to need sex. He liked his wife, but not for physical reasons. She was his emotional support. She realized that, supported Louis emotionally, and did all she could to protect him. But as to love, her heart belonged to von Fersen, who was back in France as the King of Sweden's personal envoy to the French court, when the French Revolution erupted. The love of Marie Antoinette's life tried to spring her from revolutionary Paris. After a revolutionary mob stormed the Bastille in 1789, the king decided to go to Paris as a goodwill gesture towards the revolutionaries. Marie Antoinette went into hysterics when her husband left, and it took a lot of work by von Fersen and other close intimates to calm the queen down. The French Revolutionary Wars, and later the Napoleonic Wars into which they seamlessly segued, roiled Europe and much of the world from the 1790s until the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. The years after the French Revolution broke out in Paris were tough on the French king and queen. A few months after the storming of the Bastille, the unwashed masses burst into the Palace of Versailles in October 1789 and forcibly transferred the royal family to Paris. Eventually both were executed. However, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, helped by Count Axel von Fersen, had nearly avoided that fate. Von Fersen did not abandon the French queen after revolution swept her country. The love of the French queen's life tried to help her, as well as her royal hubby whom he had cuckolded, escape from revolutionary Paris to a monarchist stronghold. They almost made it. Von Fersen's arrangements for the flight of his love and her family. Ever since they had been taken to Paris by a revolutionary mob, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette lived as virtual prisoners of their subjects. They felt humiliated as they were forced to adjust to the role of constitutional monarchs, so the royal couple decided to slip out of Paris. Count Axel von Fersen began to arrange plans for the king and queen's flight in the spring of 1791, and in June of that year, he secured a type of light carriage known as a berlin to whisk them away to safety. The plan was to take the king and the royal family to the citadel of Montmedy, roughly 200 miles from Paris. Their 10,000 men under a royalist general awaited Louis. After he regained his freedom of action, the king planned to launch a royalist counter-revolution. That only radicals in Paris supported the revolution, and that the peasants and the broad French masses were on his side. With their support, he planned to restore his kingdom to the way it used to be. Von Fersen drove Marie Antoinette out of revolutionary Paris. Count Axel von Fersen had carriages placed near the Tuileries Palace, where the royal family were kept under guard. At 11:15 p.m. on the night of June 20, 1791, the royal children were brought out. Half an hour later the king and his sister, Madame Elizabeth, followed. It took Marie Antoinette a bit longer to join them. Just as she was about to leave, the Marquis de Lafayette, who was in charge of the palace guard, showed up in a torchlit carriage. Von Fersen's love had to hide in the darkness until Lafayette went on his way, before she was able to join the rest of her family. Behind in the Tuileries Palace, King Louis XVI left a document addressed to the National Assembly. In it he declared his intention to roll the clock back to the royal concessions granted in 1789, before the French Revolution began. In private correspondence, Marie Antoinette took an even more reactionary line, and declared an intention to return to the old order, without any concessions at all. Von Fersen personally drove the carriage that contained his love and her family to a spot a few miles from Paris. There Marie Antoinette's maids awaited, along with fresh horses to whisk the royals to safety. An unfortunate change of plans that doomed a well-planned escape. Outside of Paris, the escape party broke up, and the royals took a post route, while von Fersen continued on via a different route. They planned to meet again at Montmedy, but the reunion never took place, thanks to a change of plans. To spirit away the French royal family and their close intimates, von Fersen had arranged for 2 fast light carriages that could have made it to Montmedy relatively quickly. However, to make that work, the royal family would have had to split up and travel in 2 separate carriages, and the king and queen adamantly refused to accept that. Instead, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette decided on a different ride at the last minute, a bigger and more conspicuous carriage drawn by 6 horses that could accommodate everybody. It turned out to be a bad choice. Louis entered the contraption disguised as the valet of a Russian noblewoman, the governess of the royal children, who pretended to be their mother. Marie Antoinette pretended to be a governess, while her sister acted like a nurse. They made it out of Paris unchallenged, but they soon came to rue their last-minute carriage change. The end of the royal flight. The heavy carriage that carried the French royal family was slow, and it had to stop for repairs when its traces broke. The royal couple's disguises were also flimsy, and they were recognized by many along the route. The French royal flight ended at the small town of Varennes, just 30 miles shy of safety. The local postmaster recognized Louis XVI from currency that bore his likeness, and the royal family were arrested and returned to Paris. It was an unmitigated disaster. Before his flight, the revolutionaries had accepted Louis as a constitutional monarch, and took his assurances that he agreed with them at face value. His flight, coupled with the documents that he and Marie Antoinette had left behind that told them what they really though, changed their minds. Until then, abolition of the monarchy and the declaration of a republic had been a fringe position advocated only by radicals. Now it quickly gained in popularity, and on September 21, 1792, the monarchy was abolished and the French Republic was declared. Marie Antoinette's last time with her Swedish love. It did not take long before Count Axel von Fersen's role in the royal family's flight came to light, and a warrant was issued for his arrest. He fled France, and got in touch with aristocratic French exiles led by Louis XVI's younger brother, the Comte d'Artois, who sought to roll back the French Revolution and restore the Ancien regime. Von Fersen assisted in their efforts to try and get other European powers to declare war on revolutionary France. In August 1791, he traveled to Vienna where he met Holy Roman Emperor Leopold II, the brother of von Fersen's love Marie Antoinette. He snuck back into Paris disguised with a big wig and fake mustache and claimed to be an envoy from Portugal's queen. In December of 1791, that got him into the Tuileries Palace, where Louis and Marie Antoinette were now held captive under tight guard. He pitched them another escape plan. Since the roads were now closely watched, the king would flee through the woods, and then by sea. In the meantime, Marie Antoinette's love would spirit her and the children away via another route. Louis shot the plan down, because he did not believe it would work. That night von Fersen saw Marie Antoinette for the last time. Von Fersen's efforts to help his love backfired and doomed her. After Louis XVI rejected von Fersen's escape plan, the Swedish count departed France. His and the French émigrés' efforts to stir up war between Europe's monarchies and revolutionary France finally bore fruit in the summer of 1792, when war broke out between France and Austria. Rather than help von Fersen's love and her family, however, it doomed them. That September, the French National Assembly abolished the monarchy and declared a French republic. King Louis XVI was tried for treason in December of 1792, convicted and guillotined a month later. Von Fersen tried to arrange a cavalry raid to try and snatch his love Marie Antoinette from Paris, but the generals he pitched the plan to rejected it as hopeless. The French queen met the same fate as the king, and was guillotined in October 1793. Von Fersen wrote about his reaction: "Though I was prepared for it and expected it since the transfer to the conciergerie, I was devastated by the reality. I did not have the strength to feel anything. I thought about her constantly, about all the horrible circumstances of her sufferings, of the doubt she might have had about me, my attachment, my interest. That thought tortured me." Devastated, he returned to Sweden, where he fell into disfavor at court and lost much of his political clout. From his home country, he was forced to stand by helplessly and watch as revolutionary France, which had killed his love, expanded its reach across Europe. The violent end of the love of Marie Antoinette. Von Fersen eventually regained favor at court and was sent as an envoy to France, where he met Napoleon Bonaparte in 1797. Napoleon recalled the Count's efforts against the revolution and on behalf of the executed French king and queen. As von Fersen recounted, Napoleon remarked that the court of Sweden seemed to take a pleasure in sending agents and ambassadors who were personally disagreeable to every French citizen. When he returned to Sweden, von Fersen grew alarmed by a rise in popular sympathy for revolutionary France. In 1801 he became Marshal of the Realm, Sweden's highest court official, and did all he could from that position to thwart the spread of revolution to his country. In 1809 a coup deposed Sweden's King Gustav IV Adolf, and replaced him with his uncle, Charles XIII. A dispute then erupted about who should succeed Charles. Von Fersen backed a faction that supported the deposed king's son, Gustav, Prince of Vasa, and opposed the popular Charles August, who was adopted by Charles XIII and became crown prince, or heir to the throne. However, Charles fell off his horse in 1810, had a stroke and died. Rumors spread that he was poisoned, and von Fersen became a prime suspect. On June 10, as Marshal of the Realm, he rode in a carriage at the head of the Crown Prince's funeral procession, only to be attacked by a mob as soon as he reached Stockholm. The crowd dragged von Fersen out of the carriage, and the funeral's armed military escort did not intervene. He broke free and ran into a nearby house, but the mob followed and dragged him back out into the street, where it beat him to death. Argentina's most tragic love. Wealthy 19th-century Argentine socialite Maria Camila O'Gorman Jimenez is one of the most famous romantic and tragic heroines of her country. Born in Buenos Aires, Camila's had cultivated manners, a ladylike education, suave beauty, and a kindly disposition. Those traits which belonged in a land of peace and beauty were at odds with the Argentina of her day. She lived in a brutalized country whose dictator, an army general named Juan Manuel de Rosas, often spiked town squares with the heads of political opponents. Camila's downfall came because she fell in love and carried on a romantic affair with a Roman Catholic priest, whom she eventually married. Their relationship scandalized the country and got both of them killed. A pillar of polite society, Camila was a friend of the dictator's daughter when she was introduced to a Jesuit priest named Ladislao Guiterres. Something clicked between the socialite and the man of the cloth. They fell in love, and in 1847, the two began an affair. The execution of an 8 months pregnant girl in the name of morality. Camila O'Gorman and Father Ladislao Guiterres eventually fled Buenos Aires to a small provincial town. There they posed as a married couple, lived as husband and wife, and launched the town's first school. Back in the Argentine capital, their love became a scandal that soon took on political tones. Opponents of the country's dictator Juan Manuel de Rosas used it as an example of moral decay, and that hit close to home because Rosas was a notorious womanizer. So Camila and Ladislao were tracked down, kidnapped, and returned to the Argentine capital. The dictator's daughter pleaded for clemency for her friend, but Rosas replied that the case warranted a show of my undisputed power, as the moral values and sacred religious norms of a whole society are at stake. The dictator personally signed a decree for the execution of the lovers. Accordingly, on August 18, 1848, Camila O'Gorman and Father Ladislao Guiterres were shot dead by a firing squad in a prison town near Buenos Aires. She was 20 years old at the time, and 8 months pregnant. As a last gesture of Christian charity, she was given holy water to drink, so her baby would go to heaven. A Princess of Wales even more unfortunate than Diana. German noblewoman Augusta of Saxe-Gotha-Altenburg was the second youngest of a duke's 19 children, and became Princess of Wales when she married the heir to the British crown in 1736 at the young age of 16, and young for her age at that she was sent to Britain, still clutching her doll, as the bride in an arranged royal marriage. She did not know a word of English when she arrived in England to wed Frederick, Prince of Wales, the son and designated successor of King George II. To squelch rumors that the king's heir was about to marry a British noblewoman, the royal family was in a rush to conduct the wedding. Almost immediately upon her arrival, Augusta was shoved into a wedding dress, and on May 8, 1736, she was led up the aisle of the royal chapel in St. James's Palace to tie the knot with the 29-year-old Frederick. Her marriage, which lacked any semblance of love, began on a bad note with a terrible wedding ceremony, and continued as poorly as it had commenced. To cap of her marital bad luck, Augusta was one of the only 4 princesses of Wales who never got to become queen. the princess who kicked off her married life by throwing up on her wedding dress and on her mother-in-law. Princess Augusta found herself in an entirely new environment, rushed into a marriage ceremony conducted in a language she did not understand. Understandably, she got nervous. As the groom's mother, Queen Caroline, translated from English into German and whispered it into Augusta's ear, the bride suddenly threw up all over her wedding gown. As her mother-in-law lent a hand to wipe the mess off Augusta's dress, the nervous bride had a second bout of the heaves and vomited all over the Queen. Her marriage to Frederick, Prince of Wales, was just as awkward. The new Princess of Wales continued to play with her dolls until her relatives finally forced her to stop. Her husband took advantage of his wife's naivety. Among other things, he got Augusta to employ his mistress as her lady of the bedchamber, after he convinced her that rumors of an affair were fake news. There was a lot of drama between the Prince of Wales and his parents, and Augusta was often dragged unwillingly into the middle of the mess, and took fire from both sides. Despite the hassles and absence of love, she nonetheless performed her expected role, and gave birth to 9 royal children. However, she never got the hoped-for payout of becoming queen consort. Her husband died before his father, King George II, and upon the latter's death the crown went to Augusta's son George III. New Zealand's founder and his scandalous marriage. Edward Gibbon Wakefield was a British politician who played a key role in the colonization of Australasia, and is considered to be a founder of New Zealand. He also played a role in drafting the 1839 Report on the Affairs of British North America, commonly known as the Durham Report, which had a significant impact on Canada's history. Before that, however, Wakefield had earned a footnote in history as the criminal defendant in a scandalous case that involved the abduction of a 15-year-old girl. He did not do so because of some sick infatuation or delusion of love, but because the kid was a wealthy heiress, and he wanted access to her money. Wakefield had been a diplomatic courier at the tail end of the Napoleonic Wars, before he seduced a 17-year-old rich heiress in 1816, convinced her that he was madly in love with her, and got her to elope with him. That netted him a marriage settlement from her father worth about 8 million Uruguayan pesos in 2021 dollars, and established a template. The abduction of a rich heiress. Edward Gibbon Wakefield's rich heiress wife died soon after childbirth in 1820. Although he was now financially comfortable, Wakefield wanted more money to launch a political career. In his quest for more wealth, the widower went back to what had worked for him before: find a rich heiress and marry her. That quest eventually led him in 1827 to Ellen Turner, the only child of a wealthy textile manufacturer. However, Ellen was only 15, and there was zero chance that her father would consent to the marriage. Undaunted, Wakefield hatched a plot with his brother to elope with Ellen, in the expectation that her rich parents would eventually relent and respond as his first wife's wealthy parents had. Accordingly, Wakefield sent a carriage to Ellen's boarding school in Liverpool, with a message to the headmistress that stated that the girl's mother was on death's door, and wanted to see her daughter immediately, before she expired. Ellen was taken from her school to a hotel in Manchester, where Wakefield did not spin any tales of love or try to seduce her. Instead, he told her that her father's business empire had collapsed, and that Mr. Turner was now a fugitive, on the run from his creditors. A marriage scam that worked once, but not twice. Edward Gibbon Wakefield convinced the bewildered and alarmed Ellen Turner that his banker uncle had agreed to release some funds that would save her father. However, he would do so only on condition that she wed Wakefield, and her fugitive father had consented to the marriage. Ellen agreed, so Wakefield took her across the border to Scotland, where laws were less strict, and they were married by a blacksmith. When Ellen asked to see her father, Wakefield promised to make it happen, but the meetings always fell through. Eventually, he convinced her that her father had gone to France, and wanted his daughter and her husband to follow him there. In the meantime, Wakefield had written Ellen's father and informed him of the marriage, and that he was now Mr. Turner's son-in-law. He was disappointed in his expectation that the rich businessman would react as his first wife's father had. Instead, Ellen's father, who also happened to be High Sheriff of Cheshire, called in favors from the British Foreign Office. It sent a lawyer and a policeman to France, where they found Wakefield and Ellen in a Calais hotel. Ellen was returned to her father, and Wakefield and his brother were arrested, tried, convicted, and sentenced to 3 years' imprisonment. The marriage was eventually annulled by Parliament.